Chapter 3: What That Something Can Do for You. There are thousands, yes millions of people seeking the secret, the key to health, riches, happiness, contentment, and a solution of their problems. Through the ages, many men and women had the secret, used the power, and I am positive you can acquire it too, if you will think as you read, accept and apply the ideas contained herein. What do you want? Where are you going? Answer these two questions and you will give your life purpose and direction. If you don't know what you want or where you are going, you will get next to nothing and end up nowhere. The person who is unsettled in mind is surrounded with unsettled conditions. Never forget, like always attracts like. How you are thinking today determines what you will be and where you will be tomorrow. Have you ever noticed the indecisive individual? If he is behind the wheel of a car, he is first in one lane and then in another. He slows down to make a turn, then changes his mind and speeds up. He is overcautious one minute and reckless the next. He doesn't know where he's at or why, and no one else does either. That is no way to get any place or do anything worthwhile. If you are unsettled, uncertain, undecided in your thoughts and actions, it is a sure sign that you are not in complete control of your mind and emotions. It is evidence that you have not yet been introduced to this creative power within, which can transform your life. Today, there is a superabundance of talk about atomic power. You may notice that they always compare what an atom bomb, or a hydrogen bomb, or a cobalt bomb can do in terms of so many thousand tons of TNT. When I first discovered this power in me, the power that best described it was TNT. If you have a force in you equal to TNT, you don't need any greater power than that to move the mountains of fear and doubt and worry and tension and inferiority and frustration and hate and greed and prejudice which have been holding you back and weighing you down. Just light the fuse by picturing right things happening to you. Then step back and let that something, the magnetic creative power within you, take over. What can it do for you? You name it, and it can do it. Name it, believe in it, picture it, work at it, and this power will attract to you everything you need to accomplish what you desire. Overcoming handicaps. A friend of mine who stuttered when a boy wanted to be a preacher. He grew up still wanting to be a preacher, but when he confided his desires to friends and loved ones, they either laughed at him or tried to discourage his ambition. Better pick up some vocation where you don't have to appear in public, they recommended. No one will ever listen to you. Why, you can't speak a sentence without difficulty, and when you start stammering, it's embarrassing. It takes you half a minute sometimes to get a word out. But I don't have to be this way all my life, this man insisted. One of these days, I'm going to speak as well as anyone else. I can see myself doing it, and I will do it. Today, this man has a big church on the West Coast. He is one of the most convincing and forceful speakers I have ever heard, and you would never know that there was a time when he had such a serious impediment in his speech. How did he overcome this drawback? By picturing, by calling upon that God-given creative power to help him out. He told me he used to go out into the farmyard and talk for hours to the chickens. He imagined they were people and that he was addressing them. He said, I seemed to scare them at first, and I guess I did go through a great many contortions, trying to speak without distortion. Sometimes they would eye me curiously, stopping their eating to do it, and I would imagine I was holding their attention by my oratory. Occasionally, they would act as if they were mesmerized, as chickens often do, and I would pretend I was spellbinding them. Gradually, I obtained better and better control of myself, partly through this practice and partly through gaining an understanding of what had caused me to stutter. You see, my father had been a very dominating man. He believed in the old adage, a child should be seen but not heard. He criticized me, as a boy, when I would speak or express my ideas. It made me self-conscious. I became afraid that I would be ridiculed every time I opened my mouth. This caused me to start stuttering. After that, I was reluctant to speak in the presence of anyone, and people didn't want me to try because it distressed them to see me struggle to say what I wanted to say. When I found that I could speak without stammering in the presence of the chickens and livestock, I developed the confidence that I could speak just as well in the presence of people. This confidence came as a result of a funny idea which occurred to me. I got the idea that all I had to do was to picture people as so many chickens and horses and cows, and by doing that, I would lose my fear of them. It was a boyish concept, but it worked. It helped me not to take myself too seriously, to overcome my sense of inferiority and my feeling of self-consciousness. I realized too that I had been picturing myself unable to talk in the presence of others because I had been afraid of my father's rebukes. As soon as I changed this picture and asked for the power to express myself without fear, that something took hold of me. I then attracted the experiences and the training which developed me into the preacher I am today, just as I had visualized so many years ago. No matter what your seeming handicap, this creative power is ready and waiting to help you overcome it. Are you preparing your mind for the manifestation of this power in and through you? How can you believe? You first have to be convinced that this power isn't freakish, that it is real and dependable, that you'll be able to recognize it when you discover it within you, and that you will know how to go about using it. That's the purpose, of course, of this book, to reveal that creative power to you, and to give you the know-how to make it work successfully for you, as it has for thousands of others. But you who are listening can't sit on the outside looking in and expect to experience the explosive force of this tremendous power in your consciousness. You've got to open up your inner mind and make it receptive, so the TNT you've hidden away there through wrong thinking and perhaps ignorance of its existence can come out and start banging away at your self-made obstacles and drawbacks and difficulties and problems. You lick whatever you're up against in life, not from without in, but from within out. Things first happen in the mind before they can happen in the world without. This is a wallop the first time you realize it. You don't make a move except through your free will you choose to do so. You can't lay this book down even unless you make up your mind to do it first. And you can't enlist the aid of that something within until you remove the restrictions you have placed upon it through your wrong thinking. Don't be discouraged. A good friend of mine, named Jones, had not been getting anywhere in his chosen field of advertising. He was just a run-of-the-mill operator. He decided one day that he would have to change all of this. He hadn't known what he really wanted in his line or where he was going, so he looked around him. Was there an advertising position that he felt he was especially qualified to fill? Yes, there was. The advertising managership of a national publication similar to the National Geographic. Let's call it the World Travel Monthly. My friend had been a world traveler. He had a feeling for this position. He began to see himself acting as advertising manager. He could put real enthusiasm into such a visualization. As his interest grew in the possible landing of this job, he made inquiries of the magazine's owner. Sorry, we are well satisfied with our present advertising manager, Mr. Haley. He has been with us many years and he is doing fine work. As far as we are concerned, he has a lifetime position with us. Such information would have been enough to discourage 9 out of 10 men, but not Mr. Jones. He felt himself impelled to say, "That's all right, but I'm so tremendously interested in your publication, and it would give me so much personal satisfaction to be associated with it, even in an unofficial capacity. Would you mind if I sat in on your editorial and advertising conferences whenever I can and made my recommendations from time to time as though I were a member of your staff, but without pay?" The proposal was so unusual that it caught the interest of the magazine owner. "I personally would have no objection if you were that much interested," he told Mr. Jones. "However, you would have to sell this idea to Mr. Haley. He might not like to have a man who is interested in his position associating with him in this manner. But if he is willing to have you devote such spare time as you have to our interests, without any obligation on our part, you are welcome to do so." Mr. Jones called upon Mr. Haley. The two men took an immediate liking to each other. A warm friendship sprang up, which continued through 8 years, during which time Mr. Jones made himself of great value to the World Travel Monthly, and became conversant with every phase of its operation while he occupied himself with other advertising interests which made him a living. Finally, there came a day when Mr. Haley was offered a position in California, and decided for health and personal reasons, having always wished to reside in this state in his later life, that he would resign from the World Travel Monthly and go west. Mr. Jones is today the advertising manager of the World Travel Monthly, having stepped into Mr. Haley's position with full knowledge of it, a position he pictured himself occupying for 8 years and worked at all that time. You still think that inner power can't bring you what you want? What inspiration can do? Do you feel despondent, hopeless, like ending it all? That's how H.C. Mattern felt some years ago. He had come to New York City from his home in Pennsylvania, which he had left because of family and economic troubles. He had hoped to get back on his feet in New York, but things, as they often do when you're upset mentally and emotionally, had gone from bad to worse. Mattern finally decided, since he owed 7 weeks' room rent, was down to his last couple of dollars, and had exhausted prospects and resources, that the only way out was suicide. But there were several little errands he was intent on doing first, and one of them led him through the book department on the ground floor of Macy's department store. As he passed a book table, the title of a book caught his eye and challenged him. The title was Your Key to Happiness by Harold Sherman. In Mattern's disturbed state of mind, this title acted as a red rag is supposed to act upon a bull. Mattern raged to himself, "There's no such thing as a key to happiness." But the title stayed with him as he reached the sidewalk, like the lance of a bullfighter stuck in his side. On impulse, he wheeled about, retraced his steps, went back to the book table, took up the book, and bought it with his last remaining dollars. Returning to his room with the poison he had also purchased to take his life, Mattern thumbed through the book in a defiant mood. One of the first passages he came across spoke to him in these words: "Whether you realize it or not, you are directly or indirectly responsible for everything that happens to you." Mattern almost threw the book out the window. He had been blaming his unhappy experiences in life upon others, telling himself that circumstances beyond his control had brought these desperate conditions upon him. The last person he wanted to face was himself, least of all to have to admit that he may have been the cause of any of his shortcomings or problems. To prove that the author of Your Key to Happiness didn't know what he was talking about, Mattern read further. But the further he read, the harder he found himself being hit. The book continued. "You may be wondering at this very moment whether there is any real way out of the difficulties which surround you. And if you are, my answer to you is, don't lose hope. There is a way to solve your problems, to relive the conditions which may now be pressing in upon you, a way that will enable you to achieve the things in life which mean most to you." Mattern picked up interest. His thoughts of suicide began to recede into the background of his mind. What was this way? How could he ever pull himself out of the tailspin he was in? There it was, in plain black and white. You must develop the ability to picture clearly in your mind whatever success you desire. Remember, I've told you that this message isn't new, that it has been written and delivered thousands of times, but it is always new to the man or woman who receives it for the first time. Harold Sherman was telling Mattern just what I am telling you about the power within. Sherman had discovered that power in his way, as I had discovered it in my way, and we both were given the urge to tell the world about it. But Mattern had to be shown. He had to reason it out. Every step had to appeal to his logic. He wasn't going to be fooled by nice words or promises. He had become too disillusioned, too far gone to hit any comeback trail unless he could blaze it himself. But as he dug into the contents of this little book, things began to make sense that had never made sense before. He commenced to review his life in the light of the understanding he was now getting about the operation of his own mind and emotions. He could begin to see how many of his wrong thoughts had attracted wrong results to him. And when he came to the passage where Sherman states that an individual can learn to capitalize upon his failures of the past, that he can extract constructive lessons from them, and that every individual possesses some hidden resources and talents which can be crystallized and developed to pull him out of an economic crisis, Mattern asked himself, what have I ever done which I can turn to now and realize money on? He thought back through his life and reflected, sadly, that he had been a jack of all trades, a master of none. There didn't seem to be any combination of skills and talents he could call upon to aid him in his extremity. But wait a minute. Some years ago, he had tried to develop a chemical formula for cleaning and preserving leather upholstered furniture. He had mixed different ingredients together and had come close to a satisfactory solution, but had finally given up on the project. Perhaps if he renewed his efforts in this direction, then, wham, it happened. Out of the blue, straight from his subconscious, as though handed him on a platter, came the formula he had been seeking. The instant he received it, he knew it would work. This was it. At 2 o'clock in the morning, H.C. Mattern shelved all plans for leaving this world. Instead, he began making plans for getting hold of the necessary chemicals as soon as the stores opened later in the day for preparing the solution and finding a buyer for his services in cleaning and preserving leather upholstered furniture. All doubts were gone. A new faith in himself and God had been born. There was a key to happiness, and he had found it. Mater knew in that moment that this formula had been prepared for him by that something, the creative power within, in answer to his previous desires and efforts. The only mistake he had made was giving up too soon. But this formula, once created, had been held for him in his subconscious. Later in the morning, a new and vitalized Mattern visited the nearest hardware store and talked the owner into extending him some $8 worth of credit so he could obtain the ingredients he needed to mix the formula. He hurried back to his room on which he owed the 7 weeks' rent and put the chemicals together. Then he sat down to let the power within him tell him where to go to sell his product and himself. The name W&J Sloan, a big Fifth Avenue furniture store, came to mind. This company obviously had an extensive leather upholstered furniture department. Mattern phoned and got the man in charge on the wire. He said, "I'm H.C. Mattern. I've developed a solution for cleaning and preserving all leather goods, especially leather furniture. I'd like to come up and demonstrate it to you." "Come ahead," the executive invited. "If you've got something like that, we could certainly use it." When Mattern arrived with his solution, he was escorted to the storeroom and shown a leather upholstered divan in a sad state of disrepair. The leather was dried and cracked and soiled. It looked like a hopeless job, and the severest kind of a test for this chemical formula. But Mattern accepted the challenge. After 1 hour of hard work, he called the executive back to look at the result. And the executive gasped in amazement, in utter disbelief. "It looks as though you've substituted a new divan for me," he said. "This can't be the old one. The cracks are softened up and smoothed out, the leather is pliable and alive again, and the soiled spots are gone. Mr. Mattern, you've just earned yourself a contract to clean and preserve all of our leather upholstered furniture." H.C. Mattern left the W&J Sloan Company that morning with a check for $400, advance payment for the work he was to do for them. That's something. The creative power you are going to learn how to operate for you had done it. It would have rendered Mattern the same service years before had he only called upon it in the right way. And what did Mattern do in an effort to return thanks to God for the release of this power in and through him? He took a vow that night that he would never pass by another human being who needed help, that he would always take time to counsel with these persons, whoever they might be. Don't read a book. Study it. Today, H.C. and his wife Mary Mattern are widely known from coast to coast. They have given away thousands of copies of self-help books to people of all races, classes, professions, and colors. In the front of each book, the Matterns write, "Do not read this book. Study it." Then they underline different paragraphs throughout with 3 different colored pens for emphasis. To make certain that the contents are studied, they staple the pages of different chapters or parts of chapters together with the written instruction. Do not remove these staples until you are sure you understand and practice what has gone before. Or, do not study this section for a month. It will take you that long to digest what you are now studying. Mattern states that it takes them on average an hour to fix each book, but it's worth it. It makes all the difference in the world in what the individual gets from any book. Most people have the habit of reading, not studying, and they don't apply themselves. That's why they don't get anywhere. Concerning the problems that various human beings are up against, Mattern declares, their problems are all fundamentally the same and can be solved only by calling upon the creative power within. As for H.C. Mattern and Mary, their keep smiling always salutation radiates constantly from them, and their indomitable spirit is best expressed by the slogan on their business card, doing the impossible because we know how. What do you think of the creative power now? Are you getting ready to accept its operation in your life? If you are, you'd better start using Mattern's method and underline every statement in this book that hits you between the eyes, that you feel can mean something special to you, so each thought will be hammered into your consciousness and made a part of your thinking. But first, before you can release this power, you will have to rid your mind of a lot of wrong thoughts and feelings. This may be somewhat painful in the doing, but it'll pay you tremendous dividends. Are you game? Can you face yourself? All right, let's go.